finally, a source of raw, real, and honest information on healthcare issues that matter most. Welcome to BS Free MD. From the latest medical information to how to stay sane as a doctor or a patient, no subject is taboo, no BS is allowed. Now, let's welcome your hosts, Doctors May and Tim Hindmarsh.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of BS Free MD. We're your hosts, Doctors May and Tim Hindmarsh. And today we have the pleasure of welcoming back a distinguished guest of ours. It's been on the show multiple times, Ryan Heath. Ryan is a highly respected civil rights attorney based in Arizona and the founder of Heath Law PLLC. He's also the driving force behind the Gavel Project, which is an anti-woke nonprofit legal organization that's making significant strides in defending free speech, parental rights, medical freedoms, and other essential civil liberties. And Ryan's work is not only impactful, but also deeply rooted in his commitment to upholding the Constitution and protecting the rights of individuals. So we're excited to connect with him again, find out where we left off with some of the things in the past in the medical freedom world that he was fighting, and see what the latest developments in his legal journey are unturning. So welcome back, Ryan. So good to catch up with you and see you again. So I don't know, where do we start? Like, what's sort of new since we last talked with some of the you were in California fighting the big fight for some of the school districts down there. And what happened with all of that was going on? I forget the young guy's name. Was it Chase? No.
Troy was the
Troy. Yes.
I believe he's graduated now and he's on to bigger and brighter things. But yeah, we're still litigating. We have 3 cases right now outstanding in California. I have a hearing for one of those cases on September 11th. So that is in the California Court of Appeals. The judge in that case, this was the case with a young girl who was forced to sit outside for 6 weeks, not given any instruction, alienated by the teachers and the administrators at the school, and just basically made to feel like a leper. I mean, she was treated like crap. And unfortunately, we had what's called an anti-SLAPP hearing. At the trial court level, there's something you can do as a defense attorney. And by the way, I just want to make clear, I'm not licensed in California, so I hire California attorneys to take on these Gavel Project cases. But at the trial court hearing on the anti-SLAPP motion, it's basically an expedited process to dismiss a case before you get into discovery, before you even get to a motion to dismiss under 12b-6, which is the standard motion to dismiss. And these types of cases typically involve free speech. The idea is if you are engaged in an activity that relates to your petitioning the government, or you making a statement as an individual and you're sued because of that statement or because of your action in petitioning the government, you can file what's called an anti-SLAPP motion. That's a strategic lawsuit against public participation is what SLAPP stands for. And so during this hearing, the other side basically convinced the judge, it was quite absurd, that their discrimination, their decision to punish and really cause mental trauma against our client was in furtherance of their free speech rights as government officials. And they had the right to express a particular viewpoint on the topic of whether masks were effective and safe and good for stopping the spread of COVID. But apparently our client doesn't have any free speech rights, because the judge granted the anti-SLAPP motion and said, well, they were advocating for one side of the topic. But there's a very long list of case law here in the United States from the Supreme Court saying that viewpoint discrimination by government officials, punishing people for expressing a particular viewpoint, is impermissible. It violates your First Amendment rights. Something else that was rather staggering about that case is that during the proceeding, the judge actually took judicial notice of the fact that our client was somehow dangerous to her classmates because she could be an asymptomatic spreader of COVID. And he also found that masks were effective in preventing the spread. It protects the wearer, it protects the people who are around the wearer. I mean, none of these things have been borne out by any evidence. The judge basically rejected every single allegation in our complaint, which he was required to accept as true, and made a political decision. So we're in the Court of Appeals now with that case. And hopefully we'll get a good judgment from the California Court of Appeals, and we'll be back in the trial court soon.
Wow.
So, yeah, so these freedom of speech cases are very near and dear to my heart. For really, the primary reason is because I have a big mouth, and so I I was talking to May about this, and I said, well, we'll just ask Ryan. So we have this podcast, and then we have the Doc Tales with Cocktail show where we get a little bit more crazy and whatnot. And so as a physician, right, where is the limit on what I can say in my private time, not as an advocate for my employer, not as an advocate for my patients, but just as an advocate for myself? Is there any limit on what I can say where the employer can say, hey, you can't do that because, you swore online and that's bad and that makes us look bad because we employ you? Like, is there any limit, or is that all contractually based?
It depends on what the contract says for you as an individual, contracting with a private entity that is, your employer. But I actually have a very interesting case that I'm litigating now here in Arizona that has a very similar set of circumstances to what you just described. So this case is against the Arizona Association of Realtors. My client, Chad DeVries, is the number one realtor up in the Prescott area. That's in Yavapai County, Arizona. And he was posting memes on his private social media pages, things that like a picture of a dog and the dog's looking at the camera and it says, you notice how if you cut off the balls of a dog, it's still a male dog, those sorts of memes. And these had nothing to do with his practice as a realtor, had nothing to do with his professional services or his employment practices. And they decided to fine him $1,000 for putting these memes on his private social media pages. And they're trying to take away his access to the multiple listing service. And that's significant because as a real estate agent, you basically cannot do your job without access to the MLS.
Right.
The AAR is a voluntary professional organization, just like the medical board. And so we sued them, alleging that they violated our client's free speech rights because they are a quasi-governmental entity, meaning they basically have monopoly on access to the profession of real estate, given the control of the MLS. And we have a hearing on that case on October 1st up in Prescott. So it's before Judge John Napper. It's a very good judge. And I'm confident we're going to come away victorious there. So it's another big free speech case.
No.
Interesting, because I'm thinking if we flipped the scenario and he was posting about his pronouns and that he just transitioned and whatever, yes. they would accept that and not find it offensive to their profession.
Well, which I find I find this all really interesting because it brings up there was this case with this pediatric physician assistant. So she's taking care of children. And her side gig was OnlyFans with her husband, like a hardcore XXX OnlyFans page. And I think I can't remember if she was running for some political office or something. Well, somebody figured this out and used this, don't vote for her because she's, morally, compromised. I read that article, I don't know how many times, and apparently she never got fired from her physician assistant job. And I'm like, how is that possible? But I guess if you don't have a moral turpitude line in your contract or whatever it is, they can't do anything to you. Is that, am I reading that right?
Yeah. I mean, so just to better understand what's happening and very similarly to what you just described, the Arizona Association of Realtors is a subset. It's a subsidiary of the National Association of Realtors. So this is actually something that can happen all across the country. And in fact, has happened elsewhere. Just no one's been ballsy enough to sue over it, except for my client. Luckily, he found me and I really liked this case. So we went ahead and sued. But they have governing policies. These entities have governing policies. They are the Constitution, the bylaws, and the Code of Ethics. And when you sign up to be a voluntary member of a private organization for professionals like the medical board, you agree in consideration for your dues to be bound by those governing policies. Now, what's happening in this case is that the Code of Ethics, this is Article 10 that he allegedly violated. They punished him for violating Article 10. Article 10, and I'm going to paraphrase, it says that realtors cannot discriminate against individuals based on, these particular categories, including race, sex, gender, these types of things. in their professional services or their employment practices. There's nothing in any of the governing documents that are binding contractual provisions that allow the Arizona Association of Realtors or any subsidiary of the NAR to discriminate or to punish their members for posting things on their private social media pages. And in order to change those policies, in order to change the governing policies, you actually have to go through a certain procedure per the governing docs. You have to have a vote of the board or a vote of the majority of all of the delegates from across the nation to actually alter those provisions. And so what we have here is they made up this basically DEI part of their organization, the NAR did, called the Professional Standards Committee. And insofar as that entity, the Professional Standards Committee, is mentioned by the governing docs, it has the authority to provide opinions and interpretations about how the code of ethics is to be interpreted. It doesn't have any authority to alter the provisions of the code of ethics by itself. And so what they did here is they put out these policy statements, the Professional Standards Committee basically saying that you can be punished as a real estate agent for anything that you say, even if it's outside of your contract or outside of your professional services or employment purposes. So in essence, this subsidiary of the NAR is trying to modify, without any authority to do so, the contractual rights of the members of that organization. And so my client is suing for breach of contract as well. He's also suing the complainants, the people who filed the ethics complaints against him, for tortious interference with contractual relations. And we're seeking punitive damages in this case. It could be precedent setting in a number of ways, including for physicians like yourself who have the same sort of situation where you have governing policies that you agree to as part of the medical board. And when those organizations, because they have monopoly on the practice of medicine, infringe upon your free speech rights, if we win, you'll be able to sue them for that. So I'm really hopeful and I'm very optimistic about the prospects of this lawsuit.
No,
That's huge precedent.
No, that's huge because, for somebody like me, living in Florida, I mean, nothing I say is necessarily that controversial. It's pretty obvious. I mean, I think on last week's show, I called the CDC regulatory assholes, whatever,
Right,
but but the place you got to be worried is the board certification, because they just took away Pierre Corey's and Merrick's board certification. And that's a real uphill battle, because those are gigantic national entities. They have a tremendous amount of money. You're one person fighting those. I know Meryl Nass got her. I think she got her board certification back. I know Dr. Littell, who lives 100 miles from us here. Same thing happened to him. But those are because they can be really pretty vague and broad. And then again, it's kind of like signing up for Apple, for iTunes. You have to keep your board certification, so you just click the boxes every time they change the terms of use kind of thing, whatever it's called. And you're like, did I just sign up that I have to never post anything against the FDA or the CDC or the whatever entity on Facebook? Because that's really what we're fighting. Because you look at the UK. I mean, they're throwing people in jail for several months for Facebook posts.
Whoa.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy over there. Obviously, we have a lot more protections as Americans. And that's what we really need to do, is to draw the line and make sure that we're filing these types of lawsuits that I'm talking about right now to hold these entities accountable and make sure they understand we have constitutional rights and you don't get to infringe upon those. And when you do, we're going to sue the hell out of you. We're going to try and take you for everything you're worth and make sure that we set a precedent, not just in the outcome for other people to follow, but also as a precedent showing that if you do this, you will be punished. It is a form of punishment that we're seeking here with punitive damages. I mean, that's the same thing that we're seeking in the Gavel Project's COVID-19 mass cases. We still have, I described one earlier, but we have two others out in California as well. One of them has survived the motion to dismiss on multiple causes of action, including false imprisonment. These kids were stuck in a cage for 4 weeks. I mean, outside, no shade, no shelter, told that they were being punished. Their friends walked by, made fun of them, told them they were like zoo animals. I mean, it's quite amazing. So we are winning these cases. The Gavel Project has survived the dismissal motion. So we're going to be able to eventually bring this to trial, God willing, and we'll be able to hold these folks accountable. And again, we're seeking punitive damages in these cases against the teachers, against the people who stuck them in the cages, because that's just wrong. You don't put kids in a cage because they disagree with you. That is viewpoint discrimination. It violates their free speech rights.
How long do these cases take? I know everything in law is slow. It operates on its own timeline. So, for instance, those cases in California, when we talked to you about them in the past, and like I said, they're still ongoing. Like, what would you expect as a kind of a normal timeline to get through that?
Yeah, these are years-long lawsuits. I mean, we're expecting these things. I probably don't think we're going to get to trial in some of these cases until 2026.
And you started them
we started them in 2022 to 2023. Right. So it's a long, drawn-out process. It's very expensive. You have to. You think about it this way: these school districts you're litigating against have millions and millions and millions of dollars in reserves. They can hire whatever law firm they want. They can file whatever motion they want, regardless of how frivolous it is. And we have to pay an attorney in California to respond to those. So. Again, I've asked in the past for people to support the Gavel Project, and if you do have the resources to do so, please consider doing it. I've given countless hours of my own time. I don't get paid when I work for the Gavel Project. I do a lot of reading and writing. I've given, if you can quantify my time and what I charge by the hour, I've given well over $1 million now. So the support is definitely needed, and you can go to thegavelproject.com if you have the capacity to give. We are a 501c3, and we have tax deductible gifts. So thank you if you can do that.
Yes, please. And I see this as death by 1,000 little chisel marks, because we're starting to see cracks in the dam. The lawsuits, I can't remember what states are suing Pfizer. I think Texas and Missouri, something like that.
Yeah.
And that's basically limitless resource against limitless resource. So that's going to go on as long as the AGs determine that they want those to go on. And, you look at that, and then you see, your organization and Wendell, or what's his name, Mendel Hall, and all these other people, and all these people chipping. Well, once the dam starts to break, things go from very slow to very fast.
Yeah.
And I predict, especially if one of these state level lawsuits takes off, it's going to be chum in the water for all these giant, ambulance chasing firms that just want money. And it's going to be Camp Lejeune all over again, but it's going to be COVID times a million, because COVID hurt potentially billions of people.
Right.
And so I can't imagine a place that's better to put some resources if you really want to save the country. Elections coming, you get one vote. You might get the greatest president in the world, but they're only in there for 4 or 8 years. You change these laws, you've changed the country for the rest of your life.
Right. And, I'm actually one of those, I'm not going to call myself an ambulance chaser, but I am one of those attorneys filing lawsuits against the organizations that hurt people during COVID. In my private firm, we have 2 lawsuits right now. One is against the Mayo Clinic here in Phoenix, Scottsdale. The other one is against Banner Health and Honor Health. And we are suing on behalf of widows who lost their husbands during the COVID-19, the protocols. Basically, when they put these protocols in place, these hospitals, they ended up killing people. And for example, I'd love to ask you guys a question. The Mayo case, is there ever a reason for a doctor to give a patient 16 doses of morphine in one day?
Yes.
What would that be?
Actually? Because they're micro doses, and if you're ventilated, they'll do that. They'll do that for kind of like ventilator anxiety. They're really little.
We've asked. My sister was an ICU nurse.
We've discussed this. Her sister. It's protocol,
and she worked all through the COVID. And we had a couple situations where we're required to ask. And we know what we were trained with, but she's like, oh, absolutely. But you're right. They're microdoses. Depends on the dose. Depends on the weight of the patient.
Yeah, you're not giving 10 milligrams of morphine 16 times, but you're giving, these little tiny doses. And so,
part of the problem with this is we don't know what the dosages were when they were giving these to the patient. We were still trying to figure that out. Unfortunately, they were also giving him benzos while he was having respiratory issues. So they were suppressing his respiration. These are contraindicated drugs they were giving to this patient. He unfortunately died as a result of that. So we're litigating that case. The other case against Banner and against Honor Health, very similar. Another veteran was in the hospital. Was there starved, basically. He was actually tied to a bed. There's no explanation as to why he was restrained. He ended up dying with things like gangrene and all of these terrible diseases that you really only get in third world countries. And it was neglect. They mistreated these patients. And so we're trying to hold these hospitals accountable.
We've heard, unfortunately, a lot of neglect on but people in the hospital, ICU and ward.
But there's a reason for it. There's a reason for it. It's because patients need advocates. And when you got rid of every single patient advocate, when you had 8-year-olds with true acute illness that needed, allopathic medicine, they're having an asthma attack or whatever, and they're separated from their patients or from their parents by themselves in an ER, you are torturing that child. That is child
100%.
abuse.
Yeah.
And so this whole idea of this frickin' virus that for most people was not dangerous, for the vast majority of people, it was a cold, and you separated demented, aging people away from their, adult daughter that was their greatest advocate. Of course you're going to get abuse. Not because people are abusive, because they were, they're busy and overwhelmed, and there's no one advocating for you. I know. I mean, we worked in hospitals for decades. I know how it is. You forget stuff, and then the patient's family comes and says to the nurse, "Hey, have you checked this? Have you checked that?" I mean, we've been the advocates for our family. May's father would be dead if May hadn't taken him to the ER and advocated for him.
Yeah. Well, and then our daughter ended up in the hospital. She had an unfortunate fall, dislocated her knee. We went to help. This is while we were going to help her move out of her apartment. All during COVID, we were out for dinner. The ambulance had to come because she dislocated her knee horrifically. Anyway, long story short, she was hauled off by the ambulance. They're like, you can't come. We'll tell you maybe what hospital when we figure out where we're taking her, but it's COVID and nobody's allowed. So, at the time we figured we knew what was going on with her knee, but we weren't 100% sure. And she's, out of control in pain. They had to sedate her, haul her off. She has an inability to communicate anything. I think we threw her cell phone in there with her, but so then we didn't know where she was, what they were doing to her. And so this is a highly functioning adult child, let alone, what happened?
By the time she's at the end of the block, she's been given ketamine and morphine. She's worthless to communicate anything.
Yeah, she can't give consent at that point. I mean, you don't have the capacity as an individual when you are intoxicated to give consent generally across the board. So it's quite amazing they do. And that's one of the issues we have here in these cases as well, these hospital cases, is that they, exactly as you described, basically blocked out the advocate from having any interaction with the hospital staff. And they were purportedly getting consent from the patients, but the patients were drugged the whole time. So how are you getting consent? It doesn't make any sense.
And then if they're a minor, then if somebody with a disability, like we've heard tons of horrible stories of children or even young adults who have disabilities and they're not capable of making medical decisions for themselves, then it's just horrific. And then,
and you know what else?
Or you're an adult with, high, that's in a coma, ventilated. You can't consent. No one's there to advocate. It's horrific.
There was a really amazing case I think it was in Colorado. And this guy's wife had this end-stage cancer, and she was really young. Like she was in her late 30s or 40s. And, their kids were, preteens, couldn't see their mom, had Mother's Day over over Zoom and all this kind of stuff. And then she ends up passing away. Kind of unexpectedly, but she was very ill. And this guy started this whole foundation of no one should die alone. That's the other thing, no one should die alone. And it became so painfully obvious by the end of April or May of 2020 that this wasn't going to blow hospitals up and kill everybody. So yes, some people were really, really sick. And even those really, really sick people, they should never have died alone. Like that is so unbelievably cruel to the patient and to the family. I mean, my mother was in COVID jail for the last 2 years of her life. And then she passes away because she's 92 years old and had an unrelated medical problem. And my brother and I, because we live in the United States, not Canada, couldn't go. We were watching her funeral on iPads. Like,
Sorry.
like that's unspeakably horrible. And and we weren't unique. And our case was not that bad compared to other people. But it's just like it just incenses me how quickly people can have zero moral compass. Like it's just staggering.
Yeah, I mean, the terror that people experienced, a lot of people, was real, but it was based on bullcrap. I mean, that is, at the end of the day, what happened. You had a whole bunch of institutions that were self-interested, including colleges, universities, people who were applying for grants, get their funding from the medical, pharmaceutical, industrial complex. And they're going out on TV and pumping out this fear porn, and it worked. Everyone, stepped in line except for the few of us that saw through the nonsense. And it just caused terror. People threw their logical parts of their brain out the window and just said, I'm going to follow the rules because if I don't, I'm going to kill grandma. And, fortunately, that was just repeated and put down as a dictate, even from these teachers. I mean, the kids that went through the COVID stuff, it's heartbreaking to me to imagine being a child and just wanting to have a normal life, wanting to interact with your friends, wanting to develop normally and understand. I mean, especially if you're in your formative years and you're trying to develop speech patterns, you're trying to understand how to communicate with people, develop your social cues. You can't do that when everyone around you is wearing a mask and telling you that if you take it off, you're going to kill somebody. It's just nonsense. And that's what these teachers were telling these kids. I mean, I spoke to kids in California who told me their teachers stated to them when they took their masks off, they were vile and disgusting and dangerous. They were akin to a gun. That's what actually the judge in the Coronado case basically equated our client who was showing up to school without a mask on. I mean, he explicitly did this in the oral argument. He said it was like she was bringing a gun to school. That's absurd. There's no scientific evidence supporting the notion that children are the chief transmitter of COVID-19, even especially when they're asymptomatic. Even if our client had COVID, there's no scientific evidence supporting the notion that she somehow was as a heightened risk of danger to anyone around her. And so we're still fighting nonsense. We have to convince the judges to recognize, there is a legitimate debate as to the science of the questions that the judge actually decided against us without having any evidentiary hearing. It's a complete denial of due process, and it's a political decision. It's wrong. And we have to keep fighting, and we're not going to quit on these kids. I mean, that's the most important thing to me. It doesn't matter how long it takes or whether I go bankrupt trying to help these kids. I'm going to. So that's where I'm at.
I couldn't agree more. But we had a Supreme Court justice in 2022 that thought that there was hundreds of thousands of children dying from this.
Right. There's no evidence to support that statement at all. Yeah. I mean, you can look back at the data from May of 2020 and know across the line that young people were not dying at all from this. So only people who had only children with pre-existing comorbidities, pre-existing conditions were being adversely impacted by COVID-19. I don't think there's a single recognized case across the country where a perfectly healthy child died as a result of COVID.
No.
It just doesn't exist.
No, you would have had better science backing and saved more children if you would have put every single child 7 years old and younger in a life jacket and sent them to school and made them wear a life jacket continuously, because there was double the children killed in backyard pools, which are largely healthy children, than there was killed by COVID, who were children with leukemia, multiple congenital anomalies, etc.
Right.
And I love that example because it's ridiculous. You would never do that.
You just described a children's book that was written by a friend of mine, Allie Crenshaw, really wonderful mom. It's called Frogs Don't Need Floaties. And it's all about, you're a frog. You don't need floaties if there's, there are puddles around you, like you can swim. It's mind boggling how stupid the advice that we were getting from the top was. And anyone with a rational brain could see through it and recognize, hey, perhaps these masks, which have never prevented the spread of respiratory viruses in the history of humankind, probably aren't going to work here. I mean, I still remember that video of that doctor who was went on YouTube or whatever it was, who put the mask over his face, the surgical mask, which they were saying would prevent the spread, and said, this is the size of the particles for COVID. They are larger, or they are smaller, than this vape that I'm about to inhale. And I'm going to show you what happens when you exhale. And he just blew the smoke right through the mask. It's like, that's what's happening with COVID-19. Even if you're infected and you're wearing the surgical mask, it's not doing anything.
Right.
It's crazy.
No, it was, I should have done it. I was going to sell masks with the Star of David on them, because it basically was wearing the patch in Nazi Germany,
It is a religious statement. It is very much a political statement.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there have been numerous law review articles that I found online talking about how masks are akin to making an expressive statement. When you put it on, especially today, if you're wearing a mask in the airport, people know what side of the aisle you stand on. It has nothing to do with the efficacy or the safety of what it's providing to you. It has everything to do with letting people around you know, hey, this is how I vote, or this is what I believe in. And it's absurd that judges are still holding that it was not expressive to remove your mask during the height of 2022, the beginning of 2022, especially in California, where these kids were some of the last ones in the entire nation forced to wear these face diapers in order to go to school. They were taking the masks off, all sorts of other people, regardless of vaccination status, for the remainder of the population. But only kids basically were the ones that were required to wear it after mid-February in California. And it was just a form of punishment. It was cruel and unusual. And these kids suffered needlessly because no one was advocating for them. And the folks that were having their posts on Instagram taken down, the sound taken out of them. I mean, it's just nuts that we went through that. And, I pray to God that we're able to actually get some accountability for these kids who suffered so significantly under this authoritarian rule.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because at the speed at which these lawsuits run, I'm a big believer in the fact that bullies act out of fear. They don't act out of actually being superior. Mm-hmm. And so the way to deal with a bully is to strike fear into their heart. And so you punch them in the face as hard as you can. And
metaphysically, we don't punch them.
No, legally, yes. Legally, within the law. I understand it. But that's the thing, right? It's like, so these people are all like, haha, I got away with it. COVID is done. And now in 2026 or 2027, they might be facing God knows what kind of injunction because, finally the chicken comes home to roost. So there's kind of, what's that word? Schadenfreude or whatever it is, where you kind of take pleasure in the defeat of your enemy when you know they had it coming.
I'll have to look it up.
Yeah, it's a German word. Of course, it's very long. It sounds like you're grunting, but yes. But it is like I can't stress enough how important it is that this stuff needs to continue. Because there has to be some justice. Because I have zero confidence there's going to be justice at the top. I mean, they're not going to take apart the FDA or the CDC. I don't see that happening. I mean, maybe, but that's not going to happen. Fauci's not going to jail. Like, just you're not going to win those battles, but you can win these smaller local battles, and those are actually more important because that really affects people's life. Whether or not Fauci's the head of the NIAID, whatever, doesn't mean jack to me. The fact that people taking care of kids have the fear of God put into them so they take care of kids in the kids' best interest and not in the state's best interest, that means a tremendous amount to me.
Yeah, and that's exactly what the whole point of the Gavel Project is. It's striking the fear of God in the hearts of people who think that it's okay to just, follow orders from the top and do what they know is wrong and just take advantage of kids because it's protecting their work. It's protecting their job. They don't want to stand up and be the lightning rod. So instead, they're just going to force the kids to take the punishment. And, that's why all these lawsuits that we filed include personal claims against the individuals under the Civil Rights Act, under the State Tort Bain Act in California is a a wonderful law that allows you, if someone threatens or actually engages in punishment for you expressing one of your constitutional rights, you can sue them personally. And so that's what we're doing. And the goal is to set that precedent so that we show others in the future, if there's something else like COVID that happens, people are going to think twice. And that's what we need to do in order to actually make a difference here.
And it doesn't matter how crazy your speech is, right? Like if you're advocating, if you're a engineer building bridges for the city of, Tampa, and on your spare time you're the head of the local Flat Earth Society. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter that you're completely outside of the norm of what you believe outside of work. As long as you build safe bridges and you're not advocating something dangerous or whatever at work, right? I mean that.
Yeah, I mean, there are certain limitations, obviously, the government can put on free speech. Like, for example, it's often claimed that you can't shout fire in a crowded theater. I mean, that's not necessarily correct. Like, if there's a fire, of course you can shout fire in a crowded theater. You want people to be able to get out. But if you are inciting violence, you right. are trying to get someone immediately near you to take action that is going to harm someone else, then that you can limit that type of speech. And in the school context, there are also limitations because you have to actually maintain order and you have to maintain safety. So the Supreme Court precedent comes from this case called Tinker v. Des Moines. I don't remember the year, so don't quote me to it, but it was during the Vietnam War. And these kids, very similarly to what we're arguing now with the masks, they decided against a school policy preventing them from doing so to wear black armbands to protest the Vietnam War. The kids were punished. They filed a lawsuit. They took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court held as a matter of law, as long as the student's protest is not, one, disruptive to the learning environment, and two, it doesn't violate the rights of other students, meaning it's not posing some sort of danger, it's not, forcing other students to speak, that sort of thing, then your rights as a school student actually are protected still. You can protest. You can engage in a peaceful show of civil disobedience, which is exactly what these kids were doing. They were sitting down in their classrooms. They were saying no thank you when told to put their masks on. They weren't disrupting the learning environment. They weren't dangerous to anyone around them. And they were.
But that's the lie that people believe, like you said, that one guy said that this girl was bringing it's like bringing a loaded gun to the class. So that's the made up lie. But
that's the linchpin of the argument, right? Like you're going to really have to have, I think the data is real simple on that, but you're going to have to convince them. That's the key. You're going to have to convince them that not wearing a mask made zero difference compared to wearing a mask. Because
I think that what best example of that obviously is the Cochrane study. And what the Cochrane study found is that there is no evidence supporting the notion that masks prevent the spread of COVID. So it doesn't necessarily establish that masks don't work. And that's not even what we're arguing. We're just saying it wasn't necessary. There were alternative options to reduce the spread of COVID. And this one size fits all approach was overly burdensome on the right to engage in expressive conduct, on the right to remove your mask and send a clear message to the government when doing so, that I'm not some sort of sheep that you can just bully into compliance. I'm actually going to stand on my principles, and I'm going to disagree with you on your contention that masks are the one size fits all solution to the problem. And I'm going to protest, and that's what we're doing. So we're trying to protect that right.
So in the medical world, often, we're looking at what's going on around the world and in other countries to compare information, obviously studies, but in the legal world, I know the foundations for which laws are built on are quite different. But is there any other cases in other countries that sort of are a precedent that you can use as something here in the U.S.
Use it as a precedent.
Not a precedent. Sorry, that's what I meant.
Yeah, it could be persuasive authority. Like it's not necessarily binding on the courts here, but it could be something that the judge considers as persuasive to the issue, given the analogous nature of the circumstances.
Okay.
In these cases, though, when we're talking about masking, and I want to just kind of break down the fundamentals of how the lawsuit is supposed to work. When you have a complaint and you file a lawsuit against someone, you include allegations, you list them out, you number them, you say, here are all the facts that we're going to allege. And when you're at the initial pleading stage, the other side can file what's called a motion to dismiss. And when they file a motion to dismiss, typically, there is the anti-SLAPP notion. That's a part of the motion as well. It's very similar to what I'm going to talk about here, which is a 12b6 motion to dismiss, meaning that you're alleging that the plaintiff, even accepting the facts as true in the allegations in the complaint, accepting those as true, has failed to establish as a matter of law, they haven't pled sufficiently the facts necessary to prove the cause of action they are actually putting forth in the complaint. It doesn't line up with case law. There's something missing. There's an element. If you want to prove defamation, for example, you have to meet the elements of A, B, C, and D. You have to allege A, B, C, and D. And if you want to move to dismiss that case, you do so and you claim they failed to allege C, and therefore they can't meet their burden of proof later on for the defamation claim. And that's basically what's happening here is the judge rejected the truth of the allegations in our complaint, which he cannot do as a matter of law. If you're considering a motion to dismiss, you have to accept as true what is alleged. This is not a time for deciding factual questions. If you're going to decide factual questions, you have a right under due process to bring in experts, right, to give evidence, and then have the judge decide based on that evidence what is more likely, what is more probable. And that's not what happened here. The judge just decided in this case, in the Coronado case in particular, to throw out the allegations, to make up his own factual record and without any evidence supporting his position, and just throw the case out because he didn't like it. I mean, it's crazy. I've never seen anything like that. I've been practicing law that long. I got licensed in 2020. But I mean, I've read a lot of cases and I've never seen anything like what happened in Coronado. It was a complete abuse of the judicial system. And I am praying to God that the Court of Appeals recognizes how ridiculous this ruling was and rules in our favor and sends it back down, because they're trying to sanction us with attorney's fees in this case. I mean, I face a lot of claims for attorney's fees because I take on the cases that no one else wants to. These are all the most novel lawsuits that I'm filing, especially in the election world. We can talk about that in a little bit. But, they're trying to basically punish anyone who wants to stand up to authority and just put on them tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars in attorney's fees for even filing the lawsuit, even though it's a completely valid claim. It's just, it dissuades people from bringing these types of claims in the future if you don't fight it all the way up.
Well, in the Trump cases, they went after the lawyers.
Yeah, it's happening to me now too, in the election cases. So we can talk about that if you'd like.
In the election cases, I mean, they wiped Giuliani out. I mean, the guy that was America's mayor, he brought us through 9/11. I mean, they financially annihilated him.
Yeah. So I've got a case right now. It's against Maricopa County. It's against the Secretary of State, and it's against the current Attorney General. And I mean, they are literally trying to take away my home. They put sanctions against myself and my three clients in this case, in nearly $250,000 in sanctions just for filing a lawsuit, which is completely valid, by the way. We're challenging the 2022 general election, and we're claiming, because this is the truth, that Maricopa County concealed the fact that its employees did not compare signatures during signature verification for early ballots, the mail-in ballots, and the ballots that are signed early in person. They did not conduct signature verification in accordance with law. And we didn't learn that until May, over half a year after the 2022 election. They covered up this fact until that time. And so we learned of this and we filed a lawsuit within, a few months of learning of it. And now they're trying to take away my home because for some reason, I did something wrong, but no one's explained why the lawsuit's wrong yet. The judge basically just ignored every allegation again. I guess this happens to me more than often than not. But the judge didn't accept the truth of our allegations, didn't consider any of the arguments that we actually put forth, just completely ignored those, and then just ruled in favor of the other side and sanctioned us ridiculously. So we're in the Court of Appeals right now. Actually, on Monday, I filed our reply brief for that case. It was almost 20,000 words. So I was working like a dog over the last few weeks to draft that. And we're going to get oral argument. I just put in a request for oral argument in that case today. And so hopefully in the next month, we'll have a decision from the Court of Appeals. They did grant my motion to expedite that proceeding, so they should render a decision very quickly. And God willing, my client, Abraham Hamadeh, who was running for the Attorney General spot as the Republican candidate, will be put into the Office of Attorney General because he's entitled to that office. Maricopa County, when they were conducting signature verification, did not follow the law. They compared to signatures outside of what was required. The law says that when you get a mail-in ballot affidavit, you take a look at the signature on the outside of that, the mail-in affidavit, and you compare it to what's called the registration record, a signature from the registration record. And a registration record signature is a signature you sign as a voter when you're registering to vote. Mm-hmm. In Arizona is very unique. You actually have to show ID in Arizona. It's one of the few states you have to do this. To register to vote, you have to provide identifying information so we can verify that you are a U.S. citizen, that you are who you say you are. And they were using signatures from previously submitted mail-in affidavit envelopes. Basically, during the primary election, 758,000 people in Maricopa County voted by mail or voted early. And they took the picture of that signature from that affidavit where you don't show your ID, you don't establish that you are a voter, which means that that document is now a registration record. And they use those exclusively to accept hundreds of thousands of ballots in Maricopa County during signature verification. We're trying to void every single vote from Maricopa County for the 2022 election for the race of Attorney General, Proposition 308 and Proposition 309, because more illegal votes were included in the final canvass for the statewide canvass than those measures passed or failed by. And so we should succeed as a matter of law. There's a ton of great case law in Arizona. Arizona has one of the most unique constitutions in the entire country. We were the 48th state. We had the benefit of looking at all of these 47 exemplars in front of us and taking the best provisions from those and adopting them as our own. It's a very progressive document. There's a whole bunch of literature out there explaining how progressive the Arizona Constitution is. It guarantees to voters, you have the right to have your elections decided by the largest number of legal votes. You have the right to have registration and other laws that are intended to secure the purity of elections. And what Maricopa County did is they violated the state constitution by unlawfully tabulating hundreds of thousands of votes. My client, Abe Hamadeh, lost by 280 votes. This is a simple case, and he is entitled to the office of Attorney General, and we're going to prove it.
So, but this stuff is all political, though. Like, what's, you might have the best case in the world. What are the chances that, the Court of Appeals isn't just politicized and does this, doesn't change their mind?
Well, that's a good question. So back in 1997, there was a very similar situation that happened in Yuma County, Arizona. And so this case is called Reyes v. Cumming. And in this case, the Yuma County recorder did not conduct signature verification in accordance with what is required. She didn't compare the affidavit signatures to signatures from the registration record. She instead just said, you know what, it's too difficult. I'm just going to go ahead and skip the signature verification. I'm going to put all of these ballots into the canvas and just accept all of them. And what the court we're in right now said, and this is binding precedent on them, they don't have the right to reverse this. They said that certain statutory rights with respect to elections in Arizona are non-technical. Certain laws are more than just technicalities. And that's because they further the rights of Arizonans established by the Arizona Constitution. They advance your right to free and fair elections. They advance your right to have the person elected be decided by the highest number of legal votes. This law is what the court said is a registration law that supports the constitutional right to, which is explicit, have registration laws in place guaranteeing that our elections are pure, that people are voting, are citizens, etc. And so in that case, the Court of Appeals voided the entire election a year after the fact, kicked the guy out of office who had purportedly won. And that's exactly what should happen in this case too. So we have binding precedent. It's a very good lawsuit. Amazingly, and this is something that I think I may have discussed before, but LexisNexis is one of the two major legal research databases that attorneys across the country use when doing their jobs. When you're an attorney, you have to look at case law, you have to find cases. Reyes v. Cumming was not in LexisNexis. It was not existent in that case. It's supposed to be there. And instead of having the substantive opinion from that case populate when you search the site, It just said reversed and remanded with instructions. And so I found this case early on when I was hired by True the Vote to actually come into election work. I'm no longer working with them. And I noticed that Carrie Lake's attorneys failed to cite this case, which is binding precedent. She included the same, very similar signature verification claim as what I'm arguing now. And so I sued her judge. I sued Judge Thompson in the Arizona Supreme Court asking for writ of mandamus, which is an order from the government compelling a lower government official to do his job. And I asked the court to force him to recognize this case and basically take that into consideration and make a new decision in Carrie Lake's case. And instead of getting sanctioned or disbarred for suing a judge, the Arizona Supreme Court invited me to participate in Carrie Lake's case as amicus. And so I did. I got hired by a local, very wealthy person who's one of my best clients now, to file an amicus curiae, which is a friend of the court. You're not necessarily a party to the case, but you're someone on the outside that has a unique perspective. I filed an amicus curiae brief on his behalf in Carrie Lake's case in the Supreme Court, and I won. And her case got sent back down for a second trial. And so, unfortunately, she hired a bunch of morons to be her legal counsel, and they completely botched the trial. I tried helping them. I tried filing another amicus brief in the trial court, and they objected to it because they were out telling people I was a Fed, which is the stupidest crap ever. So if she had hired competent attorneys, she would be the governor right now. Unfortunately, she didn't. So
you're kind of clean cut.
Fed. I love that.
I look good in khakis. That's the problem.
There you go.
That's right. I love those pictures of January 6th where they have all these guys getting out of the van, and they're all like 6'2", and they're super fit, and they have the haircuts, and and then the Trump shirt on, right? And then they show the rest of the crowd, and it's all these beer swilling bikers with, it's like, okay, which guys are the Feds? I don't know. I would have never been able to guess. It's so funny. Like, it's just, if it wasn't so dangerous, it would be hilarious. It's just, it's amazing to me. So, wow. Okay. It is amazing. Sometimes you don't get what you pay for. You pay a lot and you get not very good counsel.
Yeah. I mean, that unfortunately is the way it goes sometimes. And when you're being told one thing by your attorneys who you hired and you're supposed to trust, and they're claiming, don't listen to this guy, he's crazy, he's a Fed or whatever. I guess that is how it goes sometimes. But what's I think most amazing about that situation is that the very argument that I'm talking about, that you have to compare to a registration record, which means a document you sign when you're registering to vote. There was another case that was filed by the Arizona Free Enterprise Club. And this was decided on a motion to dismiss by Judge Napper, who I told you about up in Yavapai County earlier. And he held, as a matter of law, that the registration record is a document that you sign when you're registering to vote. And they didn't make that argument. They didn't make the matter of law argument in Carrie Lake's case. They established two things. They established, one, that signature reviewers in Maricopa County accepted hundreds of thousands of ballots in a matter of seconds, like so fast, that you didn't have time to consult any other document. And they also established, too, that what happens when you're sitting in front of the screen as a signature reviewer in Maricopa County is that the most recent historical signature that you submitted as a voter is what populates first on the screen for comparison. You have the one signature that's coming in that you're comparing for, and the one that you're comparing to. And you only have those two signatures. Every other county in Maricopa, outside of Maricopa in Arizona, displays either multiple signatures at a time, meaning that you can look at all of these signatures. You don't have to scroll, which is what you have to do in Maricopa. If you want to look at more than just that most recent one, you have to scroll down on the screen. Or they don't incorporate the signatures from vote by mail affidavits into the record at all, into the registration record. So only Maricopa County is doing this illegal activity. Only Maricopa County is breaking the law. And it's the largest voting jurisdiction in Arizona. It comprises 66+% of registered voters in Arizona. So if there's any impropriety here, it has huge ramifications for all of the elections. So that's what we're arguing about. And if she had listened to me, then she probably would be the governor right now.
Yeah, that just seems like such a no-brainer, because your state was wise enough to have this established, like where you have to have this, you have to show ID and you have to have a signature. Like that just seems like buying a house. I mean, just like not real difficult stuff. And yeah, it's going to be interesting because, going into, this election year, everyone's like, not, is there going to be cheating, but how is there going to be cheating? And have we cleaned up enough states to actually feel like, on the morning of November 8th, we're going to actually have a clue what happened, or are we all just going to be, hungover and wishing that we had stayed drunk?
Oh man, I hope it's not the latter. I hope we have an idea of what happened, but my experience as an elections attorney now, I've filed a number of these cases, is that the way they cheat is they use very small loopholes in the law, and they exploit those by basically adopting plans that are inconsistent with the law, but are arguably consistent because they're using a bunch of vague language. So they tell you ahead of time what they're going to do, but they don't give you the entire picture. And then later on, you figure out what happened, and then you try to file a lawsuit later on after the fact, but you only have 5 days to contest an election in Arizona per the election contest statute. And so if you want to challenge it, you have to find another way around that statute of repose, is what it's called. It's a grant of authority to extinguish rights. And what we're arguing in this case is that the legislature didn't have the authority to limit the constitutional rights that Arizona voters have by passing a mere statute. So there is another mechanism that we've invoked. It's called a quo warranto action. It's a common law right of action that's been adopted by the legislature of Arizona. It dates back to, I think, King Henry III or something like that back in England. And basically what it means is if you are a superior office holder, you have a superior title to the office in question, you can file a lawsuit to kick the person who has an inferior title out of that office, and you can take it. And so that's what we did for Abe Hamadeh. And it is an alternative to the election contest statute. We filed it within the statute of limitations, which is a 1-year statute of limitations in Arizona. And we're arguing that the election contest statute as applied to these circumstances, because the injury, the nature of the injury, how he was injured was hidden from Maricopa County until after the election. There was never an opportunity for him to have due process. And so that's what we're litigating right now.
Well, that one, I can't wait to hear the outcome there, because that's again, a lot of this is sending, you obviously want to win, you want justice for your clients, all that stuff, but there's a bigger meta narrative here, which is there's a whole bunch of us that are, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. And you got to put the fear of God into these petty tyrants, because petty tyrants are full of fear themselves. That's why they use it as a cudgel. And it's like, no, I'm not scared. I mean, the cure for a lot of this woke stuff is call me whatever you want. Call me a whatever phobe. It doesn't matter, because I know who I am and I'm confident in who I am. So whatever name you call me doesn't stick anymore. That's how you win. How we lost on a lot of these woke battles was as soon as somebody calls you a racist, you run away crying home to your mother. Well, I'm not a racist. I'm not a transphobe. Are you kidding? I have nothing for compassion for a 15-year-old kid that is so confused they want to cut their genitals off. Like exactly. Nothing but compassion. But I have nothing but absolute anger and, I'm censoring myself, for the people that set the agenda, that use confused 15-year-olds as a political tool. I mean, that's freaking evil, man. That's awful.
Yeah, especially when people are getting rich in the process. And that's what this is about, especially the gender stuff. It's about certain people benefiting financially in huge ways by exploiting children who really can't consent to any of this crap and making them permanent wards of the medical industrial complex, which is going to financially benefit for the rest of those kids' lives. It's disgusting. We have to fight it.
Absolutely. Do you have any kind of spreadsheet on kind of projected how much this costs per kid?
No, but I know there is data out there as far as what these places are making. I know Matt Walsh has uncovered some information from the Vanderbilt University Medical Center where they were talking about the huge financial incentives they have to perform these types of surgeries on kids. And I mean, it's in the tens and tens of thousands of dollars for each patient that comes through and gets one of these double mastectomies or whatever it may be. So it is self-interested people who are exploiting children for financial gain.
But that's it. I had a buddy that owned a Lamborghini. Okay. And you have two problems when you own a Lamborghini. First of all, you got to buy the thing. So you got to come up with the $300,000 or $400,000, and then you got to maintain it which is way worse, right?
It's like $1 a mile or something.
Yeah, like it's completely ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
Like this was, 15 years ago, when I think his car was a 2005, so it was almost 20 years ago, and it was $10,000 to do the brakes. Then you had a mandatory transmission service that had to be done at 25,000 miles. That was like $25,000. So it's like, I mean, they're like a trophy wife that gets terrible gas mileage. And so,
Oh my gosh.
But she's hot, right? So
yeah, right.
That's right.
And then like hot because nothing else works, like the air conditioning. So so it really, and that's the thing. Like you have to, the $10,000 or the $20,000 or the $35,000 for the initial surgeries, that's buying the car.
Yeah.
The service agreement with all the complications and all the mental health and all the hormone therapy and all the lab work, that's where the real money is. That's
God forbid if you decide you want to go back when you realize that you were being a dumb kid because you were 15 and your hormones are raging through you and you weren't thinking clearly and your brain wasn't fully developed. Then you've got to pay for the expense of trying to reverse that. Not going to be cheap.
No, and so that, I mean, that's the thing. Like you can buy the car, but the maintenance is that's what's going to kill you, man.
It's the Hotel California.
And so
you can you enter into that world and it's continuous. It's
just, and then the mental health aspects to this, which is, I mean, that's a whole other story, which is, I mean, we interviewed, Roger McFillin and then also Keith Ablow, and man, those are great interviews. You talk about people with a lot of common sense. The whole medicalization of normal. I mean, life is hard. Life is challenging. You get sad once in a while. It's not a diagnosis. It's called, being 15. It's called transitioning out of college into a career. So really, we've stripped resilience away from people because the medical industrial complex is telling you the lie that everyone's supposed to be happy all the time. Like since when?
Well, you're not supposed to be happy all the time. That's just part of life, right? I mean, it's tough. It takes grit to survive, and life is a competition. People don't seem to realize that. I think more and more people are just running through life without thinking about how everything you're doing, you're being measured against people around you, and your performance, regardless of whether you want it to be, it's being measured by onseers who have a say in what sort of compensation or what sort of life you're going to have. I mean, that's the free market. That's how it works. As an attorney, there's a reason that I get paid so well. I mean, I'm 31 years old and I'm not going to give you my hourly rate right now, but it's much higher than I believe many, many of my colleagues at my age. And that's because I am willing, one, to take on these cases, and two, I'm very good at it. So, I don't mean to brag or anything, but that's what life is. And if you can't figure that out, then you're just going to have a very miserable, long life.
But there's another thing that you did, Ryan, because we met you several years ago in person, which was outstanding. We got to see those little girls. And I'm like, my daughter needs to get married next week and have a kid. This is nuts. She's making us wait way too long. It's absolutely crazy. But you had the stones to take the risk.
Yeah.
I mean, you took, you might have had pocket aces in the brains department, but you put all the chips out there pretty early. And, so whatever you get rewarded for in your private practice, I have nothing but commendation for that. And it's inspiring, honestly, to me, a 59-year-old old fart at the end of his career, because it's courage,
and the moral and compassionate fortitude, like creating the Gavel Project and standing up for these kids that had no one else to advocate for them, and finding and getting them help in California, and doing what you could. I mean,
but that's the thing.
The combination of those.
Courage doesn't come from magic. It comes from a moral compass.
Yeah.
It's the only way. We interviewed John Burke, who's done all this near-death experience research. And there's one story that's just absolutely crazy about this kid that was raised in, I think, Somalia. And he dies, and he wakes up from this near-death experience after having seen Jesus, and Jesus tells him, "Go tell everybody about me." Well, he wakes up and there's a sheet over his face, and he's looking into the hole in the ground where they're going to bury him. And this is a Muslim country. So he becomes a Methodist, I think, pastor. And he has all these death threats because, his father puts a death threat on him because he's an infidel. He's left he's an apostate. He's left the Muslim faith. And so John visits with him every once in a while. He goes, "What are you going to do? You have all these death threats." He goes, "Dude, really? I talked to Jesus. What else am I going to do?" I'm just going to, and it's kind of a long example, but when you feel like, when morally what I'm doing is God's work, then the courage comes a lot simpler. I think that's because I've really been studying the last couple of years. We've really been like, how come these people act with courage? They act with courage because they have moral certainty. Mm-hmm. That's what it comes down to. I'm convinced of it. It's still scary as hell. You could lose everything. Absolutely. But it's okay to lose everything for something is right.
I appreciate y'all saying that I have courage. I believe I've developed more and more courage as I've gone through my career and as I've seen that I can win these fights. But when I started the Gavel Project, it wasn't because I was courageous. It was because I was terrified. Let's flash back to October of 2021 when I decided to make this decision. I'd been working for a firm out of California. I was opening an office in Arizona for them, basically just playing golf, networking with people for a year after law school. It was a great career. I really enjoyed it. And I was watching society just completely fall apart. I mean, we had the Summer of Love in 2020. I was taking the bar exam, trying to keep my head on straight while cities are burning down across the country. For the year after that, we had COVID, and everyone was still freaking out about all these vaccines and these masks and these mandates. And my sister was compelled by Phoenix Children's Hospital to get a vaccine as a nurse. And I fought back and I won for her. I was able to get her an exemption, not by asking, but by demanding it repeatedly. I sent 3 letters. And the day after she was supposed to get fired, she got a letter from the hospital saying, "Hey, you get to keep your job. Don't sue us, please." It was great. But at that time, the reason that the Gavel Project's motto is "better a gavel than a gun" is because I saw our country going headlong into civil war. And I fear that more than anything. And I really do think that we're on the precipice of something very dangerous. And if we don't take action now, if competent people don't stand up now, you're not going to get the chance later on when they're putting you in the gulag and putting a boot on the back of your neck and shooting you in the head. And that's what we're going towards. And so if we don't put everything on the line as a nation, this is what I realized back in October of 2021 when I went to my wife. She was 7 months pregnant. I said, "Baby, I have to do something. Like, I don't have a choice, because if I don't, no one else is, as far as I can tell. And if someone doesn't fight back, like, our kids, what's the point of saving for college at this point? They're not going to get to go to college because they're going to be killed in a gun battle somewhere." Right. And so I was like, look, let's just put it all on the line and let's start this nonprofit and let's go take on these cases and do everything we can right now, because we're not going to get the chance later. And so we did. And I listened to God, and that's what he told me to do. And it's the best decision of my life, besides marrying my wife, obviously. And
I would agree. But, having met your wife and your family, good call.
But I would say, the fear and looking at the big picture of what can happen in front of you, what, in the crystal ball that, as best as you can break. The fear is the why and the fire that drives you, but it's courage that takes you when you feel like, how am I going to do this? Because I'm scared as hell. And a lot of people just find it much easier to plop down with their blanket and their Netflix and just hide in the comforts of their home or their community and not do anything. But
there's another part of this. There's another part of this that makes me throw up in my mouth.
What?
And now I understand why it makes me throw up in my mouth. It's the live your best life. Well, you know what? If you don't fight for freedom and for your ability to live your best life, you're going to be living your best, somebody has their boot on the back of my neck life. And that's what drives me. I mean, it's always bugged me because there's a bunch of these influencers in the medical world that are, the husband is a neurologist and the wife is a surgeon, and they're, it's all about how, where can you take the best vacations? What are the best schools for your kids? What are the?
Well, it's all selfish.
And I just sit there and a part of me just goes gag. Like, this is, don't you see what the hell is going on around you? It's like It's like David Lee Roth when he was interviewed about Van Halen in the mid 80s. He said, yeah, the world is a swirling eddy of despair, but Van Halen is sailing a yacht through it. Yeah. Well, no, you're an asshole. Clearly. But we have so many people like that too. And it's just like, they're going to their medical conferences in 2023 and they're still wearing masks. And I'm like, do you understand that you are the sheep that is being led to the slaughter?
Yeah. And I want to take a moment to talk about the slaughter because it is incoming extraordinarily fast. And I want to talk about Kamala Harris's record as a prosecutor. She's running as a prosecutor president. That's what she's decided to run on, that she is somehow, standing by her record as a prosecutor. But if you remember back in the presidential debate of 2020, Tulsi Gabbard eviscerated her in front of a national audience based on that exact record. And you should look up the video. It's astonishing to watch. This is a woman who, as a prosecutor, intentionally, I think it was for like 1,500 people. Don't quote me on it. I actually wrote an article about this recently. You can check out the specific statements if you want to. It's the Gavel Project.substack.com. This woman put away something like 1,500 people and then kept those people in jail, knowing that she had evidence that would exculpate them. It would actually tend to show that these people were innocent. Some of these people were on death row, and she withheld that evidence, didn't put it before the court, didn't give it to opposing counsel as you're required to do as an attorney. And she kept those people in jail. And she also kept people in jail to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. This is a woman who freaking enslaved people. What do you think is going to happen when she's in the White House? You think putting her in charge of the Department of Justice is a good idea? No. People are going to go to jail all over the country for disagreeing with the government if she is in charge. And we need to do everything. I don't care who you're voting for. Don't vote for that witch.
Mel Gibson has a different opinion, but agrees with you.
I was going to say a similar opinion.
Yeah, similar. Different. Agrees completely. Different verbiage, which we won't share.
There you go.
But it's interesting because then she gets a vice president that's worse. I mean, he sent out the National Guard to shoot people with with paintballs to get them to go back into their home. Meanwhile, he lets the George Floyd riots burn Minneapolis to the ground. And his wife gives an interview of how they kept the windows open in their home so they could smell the burning rubber, knowing that people were getting to, protest their, how the stick it to the man. And I'm like, that is like, it's beyond comprehension. That's a totalitarian. Like, it's 100% what it is. He said one person's socialism is another person's being a nice guy, or whatever the quote was.
Stupid. It's the stupidest.
I just
we're living in the Twilight Zone today. That's what.
Well,
this is.
I think we're living in a simulation, but that's the evidence. It's possible. Let's tie this up with. Let's get to the happy. Let's try to be happy.
Okay.
This is a rare state for me. Because you asked my wife, my daughter the other day, actually, my 2-year-old. She looked at me and she said, "Daddy, you're kind of mean." And I'm like, I guess I am. And she looked at my wife. She goes, "Mommy, you're always nice." And I'm like, "Oh man, that's not good. Like I need to work on this around my kids because I think I'm just taking all of this pressure and what I'm dealing with at work and I'm bringing it home sometimes." And so I've been working on that a lot. Try and be better around my kids, separate my work life, my home life. I don't have a regular life. I don't have a social life at all. I don't have people that I connect with outside of work. I basically work 7 days a week, 8 to 10 hours a day. And I've been doing that for a couple of years now. And so hopefully when things slow down a little bit after this election.
I'm shaking my head no. You can't do that.
You got to make it slow down, brother.
You're going to burn out. In fact, that was part of the Wrap It Up Fun segment. Was one of the questions that we were going to ask you.
We're giving you free advice, so it's worth
what's your
exactly
go-to stress reliever after a tough day? What do you like to do to de-stress?
I like to hang out with my kids. That's what I like to do. And I'm doing better at that. I'm trying to, go to the grandparents' house, jump in the pool with them, relax, enjoy myself. And that really is my whole life, my whole world, or my daughters and my wife. So as much time as I can spend with them, I like to.
But that's a blessing that the innocence of your daughter, who's so young, to call you out on that now really is, I think, a blessing, that you don't let 10 more years go by and they're teenagers and they just see you as a grumpy middle-aged man that they have no connection with because you're so busy with work. So you know what? Yeah, it kind of stings a little bit, but I'm excited that she's done that now in her little innocent young life. And then you can recognize and go, yeah, I got to realize, because there will always be cases and there will always be this shit in front of you to fight. And that you're just one guy who can make a huge difference, but you gotta find the balance of when to let it go and enjoy the life in front of you with your beautiful family. So that's
if
my.
You want to help me have a better life. If you're out there and you want to help me be nicer to my kids, and I really am trying. I don't mean to be mean, but I'm a mean person at my job.
No, you're not a mean person. You just
please support the Gavel Project. That would be very helpful, so I don't have to spend 20 plus hours a month on top of my current paid workload doing pro bono work. So if I could pay for help with the Gavel Project, that'd be great. I don't take a paycheck. I've never taken a cent from the organization. Everything goes to pay for the attorneys. And I'd be very grateful to anyone out there that can give, because that would help me have a way better balance in life.
Beautiful.
Perfect.
Well, you want to ask another question? Make them feel.
No, I don't know.
Yeah. More fun questions.
What's your favorite legal movie or TV show?
Ooh,
is there any good ones?
So I just recently restarted watching Suits. I watched it before I went to law school, before I had the perspective of a lawyer. And now that I'm watching it again, it's very interesting to see, what they're doing. I'm like, this is not ethical. You can't do that. You'd lose your law license in a second if you did that. I mean, obviously the whole premise of the show is a guy who never went to law school, isn't barred, and is engaging in legal practice. But I mean, even the people around him, it's like, this is crazy. I mean, one of the things that's particularly interesting is the idea of a non-compete agreement. I think that comes up a number of times in the show. I've seen other lawyers talk about this as well. So you can't sign a non-compete agreement as an attorney if you're at a firm, because this is your only job. All you can do is be an attorney. It's like,
right.
Doesn't make any sense. So that's one thing that's interesting, but I do like that show.
Interesting. Okay, so if you could go back in time and have dinner with any historical figure, who would it be?
It's a close call between Theodore Roosevelt and Ayn Rand.
I love that.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good one.
So different, yet so.
Yeah.
So I was going to say,
Teddy was an interesting cat because he woke up. He grew up as this little sickly kid in New York from a very wealthy family, and ended up being one of the toughest guys like ever. He got shot into his speech, and he had a bullet lodged in his chest, and he was bleeding, and he gave a 90-minute speech. Well,
he's the definition of grit.
Huh. Yeah. It didn't just take part of his ear off.
No, it takes more than that to take down a bull moose. That was his quote. Right.
Cool.
And Ayn Rand was interesting. I've seen her go back. Have you ever seen interviews when she was interviewed by Phil Donahue in the late 70s?
No, my interest with her is specifically her writing. As an author, she if you haven't read the book Atlas Shrugged yet and you're out there, right, you're wasting your time. If you have any free time, you should pick up that book and read it. Listen to it on Audible. You can do it at time and
I agree. I had to go back and do that. I started through it, got through the first into the second. The middle third is kind of the tough part, the slug.
The last third is.
So I got the Audible version, and
I think it's either the longest. I think it's the second longest or third longest novel in English literature.
It's 36 hours on Audible.
Yeah. The longest is War and Peace.
Oh.
And I think over 500,000 words.
I think it's the second longest thing.
The Fountainhead is also very good. I really like the Fountainhead.
All right. Well,
but watch that interview. She's interesting because she's kind of.
I'm going to write it down. Who is it?
Phil Donahue.
It's with Phil Donahue, who just passed away. He was like 88 years old. He was Oprah before there was Oprah.
Yes.
He had the afternoon talk show.
He was married to what's her name that does the children's hospital?
Margot Thomas.
Yeah. Anyway, enough of that fun trivia.
No,
that's for old people like us.
That's good. Yeah, very old people.
Thanks again, Ryan, for being here. We'll link the Gavel Project as well as your other socials. And I'm so excited for you to go home after this interview, hang out with the kiddos.
Yeah, I'm taking the rest of the day off to spend some time with my kids. I haven't done that lately. I've been working too hard on these election cases. So going to go be nice.
That's right. All right. Well, good luck with anything. Thanks again for coming back and updating us. And I know we'll see you again soon.
Thank you for having me. It was an absolute pleasure. I love speaking with both of you.
It's no secret that medicine is a bit uptight. That's why Tim and I created BS Free MD, to mix things up a little and have fun in the process. Besides, we are having these exact same discussions all the time, so we thought we might as well invite everyone to the party. If you really like us, you can get plenty more and maybe see one of Tim's cool tattoos on our Instagram or Facebook pages at BS Free MD. See you next time.
While we try to keep BS Free MD as raw and real as possible, we can't be held responsible for any medical decisions or discussions had as a result of what you've heard on the show. We know, bummer. But the truth is, we really do care about your questions. So feel free to reach out to us by email at doc@bsfreemd.com.